The candlelight had barely touched her glass when he crossed the room toward her. 300 women turned their heads when Lord Nathaniel Ashford moved. 300 women holding their breath, smoothing their gowns, lifting their chins. He was the most desired man in London, and tonight, at the grandest winter ball of the season, every woman inside Viscount Hargrove's estate believed she had a chance. He walked past every single one of them. He stopped in front of the woman standing quietly near the library doors. He asked her to dance, and she looked up at him with warm hazel eyes, calm, unhurried, and completely unbothered, and said, "Your Lordship, I believe there are hundreds of women here who would gladly accept. I am not one of them." The ballroom went still. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end of this story. Comment which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The silence that followed those words was not the polite kind. It was the kind that happens when something impossible occurs, when the orchestra misses a note, when a chandelier sways without wind, when the world takes a breath it did not mean to take. Across the glittering ballroom behind silk fans and crystal champagne flutes, 300 pairs of eyes landed on the same woman. On Lady Eleanor Whitmore, 25 years old, chestnut brown hair braided simply at the back of her neck. A gown of deep forest green practical cut modest trim, nothing that screamed for attention. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room. She was not trying to be. She was simply the only woman in the room who had just refused Lord Nathaniel Ashford. And nobody in the whole of London society did that. To understand what made that moment so extraordinary, you need to understand what Lord Nathaniel Ashford represented to London. How was 33 years old, born in America, to a family of considerable wealth and landholdings, educated in England, and now by the particular cruelty of inheritance and circumstance, the holder of one of the most respected titles in the country. He had not been born into English aristocracy, the way most of these people had, with their bloodlines traced on parchment and their portraits hanging in ancestral halls. He had arrived into it like a man stepping off a ship, quietly, deliberately, and with the kind of composure that said he had no intention of apologizing for where he came from. That composure was to London's women absolutely devastating. He was tall, dark brown hair that curled slightly at the temples when the weather was damp. Eyes the color of a winter sea, gray and blue, at the same time, depending on the light, depending on his mood. When he entered a room, the temperature seemed to shift. Not because he demanded attention, but because attention simply followed him the way shadows follow sunlight. His fortune was the subject of regular and enthusiastic conversation among the mothers of marriageable daughters. His landholdings stretched across 2 counties. His townhouse in Mayfair was reportedly furnished with the kind of quiet, expensive taste that announced wealth without shouting it. And he was unmarried. 33 years old, unmarried, and according to every hopeful rumor circulating through drawing rooms and morning calls, finally ready to choose a wife. Every woman at the Hargrove ball tonight had been told some version of this rumor. Every woman had dressed accordingly. Eleanor had not. She was here because of Clara. Her younger sister, 19 years old, dark-haired, bright-eyed, with a laugh that made rooms feel warmer, had begged for one London season. One. Just to see it. Just to feel what it was like to stand inside a ballroom this grand, to wear a proper gown, to dance until her slippers wore thin. Clara was not scheming for a duke. Clara simply loved beautiful things, and London in winter was undeniably a beautiful thing. Eleanor had said yes because she found it very difficult to say no to Clara. She had not expected to enjoy a single moment of it. She had been right. Standing near the library doors, positioned there deliberately, because the library doors offered the dual advantage of escape and proximity to what was allegedly a very fine collection of agricultural texts. Eleanor had spent the first hour of the ball cataloging everything she found exhausting about it. The way women laughed too loudly when certain men were near. The way men spoke over women's heads as if they were simply furniture arranged decoratively around the conversation. The way everyone performed a version of themselves that bore only passing resemblance to who they actually were when no one was watching. She found it all tremendously tiring. She was thinking about the East Field, Back at Whitmore Estate, 2 hours southeast of London, by carriage set among rolling farmland and the particular kind of old oaks that had been there long enough to have opinions. There was a problem with the eastern field's drainage. Thomas Reed. Their estate manager had brought it to her attention 3 weeks ago. The soil was waterlogged from October rains, and if they did not address it before spring planting, they would lose a quarter of their projected yield. Eleanor had been working through solutions in her head for days. She had 3 possible approaches. Each had different costs. Each had different risks. She could not yet determine which one Thomas would favor, and she trusted Thomas's judgment on most things, but the final decision would be hers. It always was. She was deep in the mathematics of drainage costs when the crowd parted. She did not notice him at first. That was the thing she would remember later, not with embarrassment, but with something closer to amusement. Everyone else in the ballroom had noticed him the moment he crossed the threshold. Women had angled toward him instinctively, the way flowers turn toward light without being asked. The orchestra had seemed to play slightly more beautifully. Even the candlelight, Eleanor was fairly certain, had done something unnecessarily flattering. She had been thinking about drainage ditches. So when a pair of well-polished shoes appeared in her peripheral vision, and stopped, actually stopped directly in front of her, she looked up with the expression of someone being interrupted mid-calculation, and found Lord Nathaniel Ashford standing approximately 3 feet away, watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. He was taller than she had expected. She had seen him across the room earlier briefly before returning to her thoughts, and distance had not done justice to the particular quality of stillness he carried. Most men at these events moved with performance, each gesture calculated for an invisible audience. Lord Ashford simply stood, as if the room existed around him rather than for him. He inclined his head. Lady Whitmore. She had not expected him to know her name. Lord Ashford, she replied, because there was nothing else to say. I was hoping, he said with the practiced ease of a man who asked for things and expected to receive them, that you might grant me the next dance. She looked at him for a moment. Across the ballroom, she was dimly aware that several conversations had stuttered to a stop. She was aware of the particular quality of attention that comes from 300 people pretending not to listen while listening intently. She thought about what it would mean to say yes. She would be paraded around a dance floor. People would stare. Tomorrow morning, someone would mention it to someone else, and by afternoon it would be a story, and by evening it would be a rumor. And somewhere inside that rumor, Eleanor Whitmore would become a woman who had set her cap at a duke, which was not only untrue, but would make her feel for weeks afterward, as though she had been publicly misrepresented in a way she had no tools to correct. She thought about how much she disliked being misrepresented. She thought about drainage ditches. Your lordship, she said quite calmly. I believe there are hundreds of women here who would gladly accept. I am not one of them. And then she turned back toward the library doors. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds in a ballroom of 300 people is an eternity. Then the orchestra played the next note, and someone laughed at something, and the crowd remembered how to breathe. But the murmur that rose low, rippling, disbelieving, was the kind that does not stop for the rest of the evening. Eleanor was aware of it. She was not unaware of what she had done. She simply did not regret it. What she was less prepared for was what happened next. He did not leave. Most men rejected in that manner in that setting in front of that many witnesses would have retreated with dignity. Perhaps a cool nod. Perhaps a practiced smile. Perhaps a very deliberate turn toward the nearest available and willing heiress. That was what the situation called for. That was what society scripted. Lord Ashford did not follow the script. He stood beside her, not too close, not crowding her space, and after a moment said very quietly, "You were thinking about something else entirely when I approached." It was not a question. Eleanor turned to look at him. "I beg your pardon." "You had the expression," he said, "of someone working through a problem. Not the expression of someone bored by the party. There is a difference. Bored people watch rooms. People solving problems look slightly past rooms." Eleanor stared at him. "What was the problem?" he asked. "I cannot imagine that is any of your concern." "Probably not," he agreed. But I am curious." She studied him for a moment. He seemed improbably entirely sincere. There was no performance in it, no attempt to charm her with displayed interest. He simply appeared to actually want to know. "Drainage," she said. He blinked. "I'm sorry. The east field on our estate has a drainage problem. I was working through possible solutions." She paused. "I told you it was not your concern." "No," he said slowly. "You told me you could not imagine it was my concern. Those are different statements." Eleanor found herself against her will almost smiling. She stopped it firmly. "It is not your concern," she said. "Probably true," he admitted. Then after a beat, "Is it a slope issue, or is it the soil composition?" She looked at him fully then. "What do you know about drainage?" "I have 1,200 acres in Hampshire," he said. "I have spent a considerable portion of my adult life arguing with fields about what they intend to do with water." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Soil composition," she said finally. "The clay content is higher than we initially mapped. It is not holding the grade we need." "That changes the solution considerably," he said. "Yes," she said. "It does." They stood there for a moment. Two people at the grandest ball of the London season, discussing soil composition, while 300 guests tried to pretend they were not watching. It would be inaccurate to say that this conversation changed everything. It did not change everything. Eleanor was not the kind of woman who was transformed by a single conversation, no matter how unexpected. She was the kind of woman who had spent her entire life learning not to be swept away by things, not by beauty, not by charm, not by the particular unsettling quality of being seen by someone who was not supposed to see her. She had learned that lesson young. The Whitmore family had once been more comfortable than they were now. Her father, a kind man, a distracted man, a man who loved poetry more than ledgers, had allowed the estate's finances to slide for a decade before anyone fully understood the extent of the damage. He had died when Eleanor was 19, leaving behind a property that was beautiful on the surface and quietly drowning underneath. He had also left behind 2 daughters. And everyone, the solicitors, the family friends, the distant cousins who appeared suddenly when estates changed hands, everyone had looked first at Clara. Clara was 17 at the time. Clara was the kind of girl who made people want to do things for her simply because she existed beautifully in a room. Clara had their mother's face, and their mother's warmth, and their mother's ability to make every person she spoke to feel as though they were the most interesting person she had ever encountered. Eleanor had none of these qualities. Eleanor had her father's mind, which was to say, she understood things deeply and quickly, in a way that was occasionally inconvenient. She had understood at 19 that the estate was in serious trouble. She had understood at 19 that no one was coming to fix it. She had understood at 19 that if she did not become the person who fixed it, it would simply not be fixed. So she had become that person. She had learned the ledgers. She had learned the land. She had learned the particular language of agricultural management and property law and tenant negotiations, and she had applied herself to every problem with the focused, unflinching attention of someone who does not have the option of looking away. Thomas Reed had helped her. Their estate manager, 55 years old, gray-bearded with the specific kind of weariness that comes from watching good families make poor decisions for 30 years, had seen Eleanor's determination and apparently decided it deserved to be met. He had taught her everything she needed to know. He had argued with her when she was wrong and told her so plainly, and he had told her when she was right, which she appreciated more than the praise because it was honest. The estate was not yet saved, but it was no longer drowning. What Eleanor had lost in the 6 years since her father's death was something harder to name. Not ambition, she had that in abundance. Not confidence exactly. More like the permission to want things that were not practical. She had watched Clara blossom through those 6 years, had watched her sister become the kind of young woman that London would adore, and she had felt not jealousy, never jealousy, because she loved Clara purely and without complication, but something quiet and private that she did not examine too closely. A sense that the world had sorted them into categories early and without asking. Clara was the one people fell in love with. Eleanor was the one people respected. Respected was a good thing to be. Eleanor believed that. But she had noticed with the careful observation she applied to most things that nobody had ever looked at her the way men looked at Clara. She had decided somewhere around the age of 22 that this was simply how things were. She had made her peace with it. She had built a life that did not require being looked at. And then, Lord Nathaniel Ashford had stood beside her at a party she was barely attending and asked her about soil composition. She returned to the ball eventually, after he had moved on, as she had expected he would, as she had expected anyone with his options would. She found Clara near the refreshment table, flushed and bright-eyed, and clearly delighted with her evening. "Eleanor," Clara breathed, gripping her sister's arm. "Did you just refuse Lord Ashford?" "I declined a dance," Eleanor said. "It is not a dramatic event." "Eleanor, it is absolutely a dramatic event. Everyone is talking about it." "Then everyone needs more interesting things to occupy their conversation." Clara stared at her with the particular expression she had perfected over 19 years, partly exasperated, partly admiring, entirely affectionate. "He stayed and talked to you afterward?" "Briefly." "About what?" Eleanor considered this. "Drainage." Clara blinked. "He talked to you about drainage?" "I talked to him about drainage. He seemed to know what he was discussing." She paused. It was a perfectly adequate conversation. Clara made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "He never stays when women refuse him. They say he just moves on. He has too many options to bother." "Then perhaps he was simply curious about the novelty," Eleanor said. "It will pass." She meant it when she said it. She was wrong. So, the following Wednesday, Eleanor was in the middle of a meeting with Thomas Reed when the visitor arrived. The meeting had been going well, by which Eleanor meant they had reached a disagreement only twice, and both times had talked through it to a conclusion they both found defensible. Thomas was presenting the drainage options. She had been calculating 3 possible approaches, each with different costs and timelines, when Mrs. Hodges, the housekeeper, appeared at the study door with an expression that suggested the world outside had produced something she was not entirely equipped to process. "My lady," Mrs. Hodges said, "Lord Ashford is at the door." Thomas looked up from the plans. Eleanor set down her pen very carefully. "Lord Ashford," she repeated. "Yes, my lady. He says he is passing through the area and wished to pay a courtesy call." Eleanor and Thomas exchanged a look. They were approximately 40 miles from London. Nobody passed through on the way to anywhere. This was not a corridor. This was a destination. "Tell him," Eleanor said, "that I am currently in a meeting and will be with him in—" She looked at the plans spread across the desk. 20 minutes. Thomas raised his eyebrows slightly. She ignored this. When she entered the front drawing room, 20 minutes later, not a minute sooner, because she was not the kind of woman who rushed because a man arrived, Lord Ashford was standing at the window looking out at the east field. "The grade drops toward the old oak line," he said without turning around. Eleanor stopped. "How can you tell from here?" "The way the light reflects off the soil after rain." He turned then, and she saw that he was not dressed for a social call in any formal sense, practical riding coat, no pretension. He looked like a man who had actually ridden here. "You can see where the water is pooling at the edge of the tree line. That is your lowest point." Eleanor crossed to the window and looked. He was right. She had not seen it at that angle before. "You rode 40 miles, she said, "to look at my drainage problem." "I rode 40 miles, he said with the kind of calm that was beginning to seem less like composure and more like honesty. "To continue a conversation you ended before it was finished." She looked at him steadily. "I ended it because it was finished." "You ended it because you did not expect me to stay." The accuracy of this was briefly uncomfortable. "Lord Ashford," she said, "I am not going to pretend to understand what you are doing here, but I will be direct with you because I find directness more efficient than pretending. You are a man with an extraordinary number of options. I am a woman with a drainage problem and approximately 3 other problems that are equally pressing. I do not have time to be a novelty." He was quiet for a moment. "What if I told you," he said, that I am not looking for a novelty. I would ask what you are looking for. He considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. A conversation, he said finally, that does not require me to perform anything. Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment. Then she did the thing she had not planned to do, the thing that surprised even her in the doing of it. "Would you like to see the field?" she asked. He looked at her, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like relief. "Very much," he said. They walked the east field for an hour. Thomas joined them. Eleanor had sent word, and the three of them stood in the thin winter light, discussing soil composition drainage gradients and the relative merits of French drains versus open channel systems. And it was the most natural conversation Eleanor had had in years that involved someone she had met fewer than 7 days ago. Nathaniel Ashford was, she was reluctantly forced to acknowledge, not stupid. He was not even simply educated, he was curious. He asked questions that assumed competence on her part. He argued against Thomas's preference for French drains with specific reference to clay saturation rates, and then when Thomas countered, he listened. Actually listened. Changed his assessment. Admitted it. Eleanor had met very few men who admitted when they had been wrong about something. She was also aware with the part of her mind that never fully stopped cataloging things that he had not once looked at her in the way men at the ball had looked at Clara. He did not look past her at something more interesting. He did not look through her at something more convenient. He looked at her the way she had always privately wanted to be looked at, as if what she said next was the most relevant thing currently happening. It was deeply unsettling. Walking back toward the house, as the afternoon light thinned toward gray, she asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of her thoughts since he arrived. "Did you actually ride 40 miles today?" 38, he said. "I may have slightly exaggerated." She almost laughed. She stopped it, but less quickly than usual. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, watching the old oaks at the field's edge. "Because," he said, "you were the first person at that ball who wasn't watching to see what I would do next." He paused. "It has been a long time since someone was simply present in a conversation with me without an agenda." She did not respond to that immediately. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things. Then she said, "I should warn you, Lord Ashford. I do not do well with grand gestures or romantic performances. I find them unconvincing." "Good," he said. "I have never been particularly good at them. I also tend to assume the worst when given insufficient evidence." "That seems like a reasonable approach. And I am very busy." "I know. I watched you manage a drainage meeting and an unexpected guest simultaneously without losing the thread of either." She stopped walking. He stopped too. She looked at him directly. "What do you actually want?" He met her gaze with the full, unhurried, unsettling steadiness that she was beginning to suspect was simply who he was. "To come back," he said. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the house. "You know where the gate is," she said. It was not a yes, but she had not said no, and for the first time in 6 years, standing in a field, she was slowly, carefully, stubbornly saving from ruin. Eleanor Whitmore felt something shift in the chest where she kept all the things she did not examine. She did not name it, not yet, but she did not put it away either, and that for Eleanor was extraordinary. He came back. Eleanor had told herself he would not. She had walked back to the house that afternoon with the specific deliberateness of a woman who has already catalogued something and placed it in the drawer marked "unlikely to continue." And she had told herself clearly, quietly, with the same practical authority she applied to yield estimates and solicitor correspondence, that Lord Nathaniel Ashford had satisfied his curiosity and would return to London and to the 300 women who were still presumably waiting. She had been so certain of this that she had not mentioned his visit to Thomas the following morning. She had been so certain of this that when Mrs. Hodges appeared at the study door 6 days later, and said in a voice carefully stripped of editorial comment, "Lord Ashford, my lady." Eleanor sat for a full 3 seconds without responding. Then she said, "Show him to the morning room." She closed the ledger she had been working on, straightened the pen she had not been using to write anything, and told herself that this was simply courtesy. That whatever he wanted, she would address it briefly and with efficiency, and then he would go. She was beginning to understand that she was not very good at predicting what Lord Ashford would do. He had brought nothing. This was the first thing Eleanor noticed when she entered the morning room. She had half expected with the part of herself that was prepared for disappointment, some kind of offering. Flowers, perhaps. A fashionable gift from London. Something that said, "I know how this is done, and I am doing it." It was what men did when they were pursuing women in Eleanor's limited experience of being pursued, which was an experience she had largely observed happening to other women rather than herself. There were no flowers. There was no gift. There was Lord Ashford standing near the bookcase that lined the east wall of the morning room, pulling a volume from the shelf with the unhurried ease of a man who has been given permission to browse, which he had not. He looked up when she entered. "You have Loudon's Encyclopedia of Agriculture," he said. "The 1825 edition." "I do. I have been looking for that edition for 3 years." He turned the cover with the careful hands of someone who understood old books. "Mine is the 1831. The drainage diagrams in the earlier edition are more detailed." Eleanor crossed the room, took the book from his hands with a precision that was not quite snatching, but was certainly decisive, and set it back on the shelf. "Good morning, Lord Ashford," she said. He almost smiled. "Good morning, Lady Whitmore. Is there something I can help you with?" "I have been thinking about your Eastfield," he said. "That is very kind. I believe you should consider a hybrid approach. French drain along the upper grade open channel at the tree line. It addresses both the saturation issue and the runoff without over-engineering the solution." Eleanor stared at him. "I thought about it on the ride back," he said. "6 days ago. You have been thinking about my drainage problem," she said slowly, "for 6 days. Among other things." She considered this. She also, against her better judgment, considered the drainage solution he had just proposed, because it was, she could see it clearly in her mind, the field, the grade, the old oak line, actually correct. It was the synthesis she had been reaching for and had not quite found. "Thomas will want to argue about the channel depth," she said. "He will be right to," Nathaniel said. "It depends on the winter water table. Do you have records going back more than 3 years? 5 years. That should be enough." They looked at each other. "Would you like to discuss it with him?" Eleanor asked. She had not planned to say it. "If you think it would be useful," he said. She turned and walked toward the study, and he followed, and later Thomas would tell his wife that the strangest thing had happened that morning, which was that the most famous man in London had sat at the estate table for 2 hours, arguing companionably about drainage channels, and that Lady Eleanor had argued back with equal fluency, and that by the end of it, they had a plan that was better than any of the 3 she had originally proposed, and that the whole thing had felt— Thomas paused here, searching for the right word— ordinary. In the best possible way. Chai. He came back the following week. And the week after that. There was no formal arrangement, no agreed schedule. He simply appeared on a Tuesday or a Thursday, with the same practical coat and the same unhurried manner, and Eleanor stopped pretending to be surprised. What she could not stop was the quiet, careful study she was conducting. She was watching him, the way she watched everything she did not yet understand, methodically, without sentimentality, building a picture from evidence rather than impression. And the picture that was building was not the one she had expected. He did not perform when Thomas was in the room. He did not speak over Mrs. Hodges when she brought tea. He did not treat the men who worked the estate, Jim Carver, who managed the livestock, or Ned Holt, who was 70 years old and had opinions about everything, with the cool distance that marked most men of his position when they encountered men of lower station. He spoke to them directly. He asked genuine questions. He remembered the answers. One afternoon she found him in the yard speaking with Ned Holt about crop rotation, specifically about the argument Ned had been making for 15 years, that the western fields should rest every 4th year rather than every 3rd, and which Thomas had been dismissing for 15 years on the grounds that they could not afford the lost yield. Nathaniel was listening to Ned with the complete attention he gave everything, and at the end of Ned's argument he said, "He's right, you know. The soil composition in that section supports a longer rest cycle. You would recover the yield differential within 2 rotations." Ned looked at him with the expression of a man who has spent 15 years being told he was wrong and cannot quite believe someone has agreed with him. "Thomas won't hear it," Ned said. "Then you should bring it to Lady Whitmore," Nathaniel said with the comparative data. "She will hear it." Eleanor, standing in the doorway where neither of them could see her, felt something she did not immediately recognize. It took her a moment to name it. It was the feeling of being trusted to make the right decision. People respected her. People brought her problems. But they rarely expressed out loud to someone else the simple confidence that she would get it right. That was a different thing entirely. She stepped back inside before either of them noticed her. In the evenings, which Nathaniel did not stay for because he was always gone before the light fully left the sky, which was its own kind of thoughtfulness, Eleanor sat with Clara in the parlor, and Clara asked questions that Eleanor answered with varying degrees of completeness. "Did he come today?" Clara would ask. "Yes." "What did you talk about?" "Estate matters." "Is that all?" Eleanor would look up from whatever she was reading. "What else would we talk about?" Clara had the expression of someone watching a play unfold, who knows the ending and is simultaneously charmed and frustrated by the main character's inability to see it. "You could talk about him," she said. "What he thinks, what he wants, what he's like when no one is watching." "I know what he's like when no one is watching," Eleanor said without thinking. Clara set down her embroidery. "Do you?" she said. Eleanor realized her error. "I mean when the subject is not social performance. He is straightforward. He does not waste words." "That sounds like a compliment." "It is an observation." "Eleanor." Clara leaned forward. "He rides here from London, multiple times, to talk about fields. He has 1,200 acres in Hampshire. The subject is relevant to him. He has 1,200 acres and presumably a very competent estate manager to handle them." Eleanor said nothing. "He is coming here," Clara said gently, "because of you." The words settled in the room with the particular weight of things that are true and unwanted. "I know," Eleanor said, "and that frightens you." She put down her book. "It does not frighten me. I simply do not trust it." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted in the grate. Outside, the winter wind moved through the old oaks with a sound like distant water. "Because men like him," Eleanor said carefully, "do not end up choosing women like me. Not in the end. They choose women like you, Clara. Beautiful women. Charming women. Women who make them look a certain way in front of other people." She paused. "I am very useful and reasonably intelligent and entirely unsuitable for display. Whatever he thinks he wants right now, it will change. When it does, I would rather not have made myself vulnerable to it." Clara looked at her for a long time. Her eyes were soft, and her expression was the kind that Clara never deployed ironically. "You are not second best," she said quietly. "You have simply believed you were for so long that it feels like fact." Eleanor picked up her book. "Go to sleep, Clara," she said. But she did not read a word for the rest of the evening. The day the conversation shifted happened on a gray February afternoon, when rain was falling softly against the study windows, and Thomas had gone home early because his knee was bothering him, and Eleanor was alone with the accounts, which were improving slowly, stubbornly, like everything worth improving. And Nathaniel sat on the other side of the desk, with the 1825 edition of Loudon open in front of him, which he had with remarkable patience eventually been granted permission to read. How was not reading it? He was watching her work. She noticed, she always noticed, but she finished the column she was adding before she looked up. "You are staring," she said. "I am observing," he said. "Is there a difference?" "Staring implies I'm not thinking. I'm thinking quite a lot." She set down her pen. "About what?" He was quiet for a moment. The rain moved across the window in patterns. He closed the book carefully and set it on the corner of the desk. "Everyone who has ever come to me," he said, "has come wanting something. I am not saying that as a complaint, it is simply true. My fortune. My name. The connection to people my name opens doors to. My land. He paused. Even William, my closest friend. I sometimes wonder whether he would be my friend if my circumstances were different. I cannot be sure. I have never been able to test it. Eleanor said nothing. She listened the way she had learned to listen fully, without preparing her response while he was still speaking. You are the first person in I cannot tell you how many years who has wanted nothing from me. He looked at her steadily. You refused me publicly. You did not invite me here. You have not attempted to impress me, or to make me feel that I am necessary to you. You are honest with me when I am wrong, which is, he paused, more refreshing than I can adequately express. The study was very quiet. You make it sound, Eleanor said carefully, as though you are grateful to be treated with ordinary respect. Perhaps I am, he said. When it is rare enough, ordinary respect becomes remarkable. She considered this. She thought about all the women at the Hargrove ball. She thought about the way the crowd had moved around him, like water around a stone. She thought about what it might feel like to move through a world where every person you met wanted something from you that had nothing to do with you. That is a lonely way to live, she said. It is, he agreed. She looked at him. Really looked at him the way she rarely allowed herself to, and felt the thing she had been keeping in the drawer shift against its containing, like something alive. I want to be clear, she said. I am not telling you this to encourage anything, but... She stopped. But I find you less predictable than I expected, and I find that somewhat inconvenient. He looked at her for a moment, with the expression she was coming to recognize that particular quality of careful attention, as though she were something he was trying to understand and did not want to get wrong. I will try, he said gravely, to be more predictable. Please do not, she said before she could stop herself. She picked up her pen and returned to the accounts. But the column she added next had an error she did not catch until morning. March arrived with the particular grudging quality of English spring's cold still, but with a different quality of cold. An almost relenting cold that suggested warmth was possible even if it had not yet committed. The drainage work had begun. Nathaniel had sourced 2 laborers from his Hampshire estate who had experience with the specific approach they had settled on, and they had arrived the previous week with the quiet competence of men who knew what they were doing and did not need to announce it. Eleanor had watched the work begin with the combination of satisfaction and anxiety that she brought to most things. Thomas had conceded the point about Ned Holt's western fields. Ned had received this news with dignity. It was by all practical measures a productive month. It was also the month that London began to notice. The letter came from Lady Beatrice Langley on a Thursday. Lady Beatrice was 40 years old, widowed at 32, and had emerged from her husband's death with the particular clarity of vision that sometimes comes from surviving something that was supposed to break you. She was the closest thing Eleanor had to a friend in London. They had met 3 years ago at a county agricultural exhibition of all places, where Beatrice had been examining a grain separator with genuine interest, and Eleanor had been the only other woman in the building, not waiting for a husband near the exit. The letter was warm and direct, which was how Beatrice communicated everything. My dear Eleanor, it began. You have been the subject of more conversation in the last 6 weeks than you would find comfortable. So I am writing to warn you before the season resumes, and you encounter it in person. People have noted Lord Ashford's absences from London. People have connected those absences with the particular forensic enthusiasm of the socially idle to the fact that you exist in the direction he keeps traveling. I want you to be prepared for what the season will bring. Society is not kind to women. It does not understand. And you, my darling, are a woman they cannot categorize, which frightens them considerably. Come to London for Lady Carmichael's dinner at the end of the month. I will be there. I would very much like to stand next to you when people begin asking questions. Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it in the drawer under the correspondence she handled last. She sat for a while with the knowledge that the quiet she had built around these past weeks, the practical world of the estate, and the drainage work, and the strange, careful thing developing across a study desk, was about to be broken open by a world that had opinions about everything and understanding of very little. She was not afraid of London. She was afraid of what London would make of something she had not yet fully named herself. She went. She went because Beatrice had asked, and because Beatrice did not ask things without reason, and because Eleanor had long ago decided that the only thing worse than facing difficult things was the specific misery of avoiding them until they became unavoidable. She also went because Nathaniel had mentioned with the careful casualness he had adopted for certain things that Lady Carmichael's dinner was an event he usually attended. She told herself this was not a factor. She was becoming aware that she told herself many things that were not entirely true. Lady Carmichael's dinner was everything the Hargrove ball had been distilled. Smaller 60 people rather than 300, but more concentrated in its attention. These were not people watching from across a ballroom. These were people seated at the same table with the specific intimacy of silverware and wine, and nowhere to look but at each other. Eleanor arrived with Clara and found Beatrice immediately, because Beatrice had the gift of being locatable in any room. Tall, silver-haired before her time, wearing the particular expression of a woman who has decided to enjoy herself regardless of what occurs. "You look exactly the same," Beatrice said, embracing her. "I have been outside a great deal," Eleanor said. "It suits you." Beatrice held her at arm's length, studying her. "Something else suits you too, I think. You will tell me about it later." "I will tell you about drainage improvements," Eleanor said. Beatrice laughed. "Yes, that is what I meant." The dinner proceeded with the stately pace of expensive food and careful conversation. Eleanor was seated at the table's lower end, which was fine by her. The people near her were a botanist's widow who had opinions about soil acidity, and a retired naval officer who had once managed a plantation in the Caribbean and understood crop rotation from a completely different angle. She found herself unexpectedly engaged. She did not look down the table toward where Nathaniel was seated. She did not look once. She was aware of the moment the conversation at the other end shifted, could feel it the way you feel, weather changing in the subtle reorientation of the room. She heard Lady Victoria Pembroke's voice rise slightly, with the particular musical quality of someone making a point for an audience, rather than a person. "Lord Ashford," Lady Victoria said. Eleanor heard the name clearly, because the name had become in recent weeks something her ears caught automatically. "I have been told you have been spending a great deal of time in the country. Quite the agricultural enthusiast." There was laughter. Light crystalline, the kind that is not quite kind. "I have interests there," Nathaniel said. His voice was even. "Property matters, no doubt," Lady Victoria continued. "Though I had heard one hears so many things that the particular attraction was rather more specific than property." The table managed to be simultaneously loud with conversation and perfectly quiet in the way that mattered. Eleanor did not move. "You hear correctly," Nathaniel said. The quiet deepened. "I suppose we shall have to be introduced," Lady Victoria said with a smile that Eleanor, glancing now despite herself, could see was crafted with the precision of a weapon to whatever has inspired such devoted attention. She was looking at Eleanor when she said it. Eleanor held her gaze and felt in that moment the full weight of every doubt she had ever carried about herself. The drawer opened. Every careful, protected belief she had built. "I am not the woman men choose. I am respected, but not wanted. Beauty and charm and suitability are currencies. I do not carry," poured out with the particular viciousness of things held back too long. She felt Clara's hand briefly on hers under the table. She breathed. Then, because she was Eleanor Whitmore, and she had been managing difficult things since she was 19 years old, and she was not going to stop. Now she met Lady Victoria's gaze across 30 feet of candlelit table and said clearly and without apology, "Lady Victoria, Lady Whitmore, I manage an estate in Surrey. I understand you have interests in the region." It was not a victory. It was not a defeat. It was simply a refusal to be diminished, stated plainly, and then set aside. Beatrice, seated 2 places from Eleanor, took a deliberate sip of her wine. What happened after dinner was the thing Eleanor had not predicted. The men had separated from the women for the customary post-dinner ritual, and Eleanor was in the drawing room with Beatrice and the botanist's widow and Clara, and she was telling herself with considerable firmness that the evening had gone well enough and she should not think about Lady Victoria's smile or the sound of the table's loaded silence when the doors opened. They were not supposed to open yet. Nathaniel walked in. Behind him came William Hartwell, his closest friend, a lean, dark-eyed man of 34, whom Eleanor had met twice and assessed as sharp and direct, and likely the only person in London with genuine insight into who Nathaniel was. William had the expression of a man who has said this is a terrible idea at least twice in the last 10 minutes and been cheerfully ignored. The remaining women in the drawing room rearranged themselves with the swift instinct of a tide shifting. Nathaniel crossed the room without deviation. He stopped in front of Eleanor. He said quietly, "I owe you an apology for what was said at dinner." "You said nothing wrong," Eleanor said. "I should have stopped it sooner." "It was not yours to stop." "I disagree," he said. "But we can argue about that later." He paused. "Will you walk with me?" "The Carmichaels have a conservatory." Eleanor looked at him. She was aware of the drawing room's entire attention distributed across them like light through glass. She was aware of Clara watching with held breath, and Beatrice watching with barely contained satisfaction, and several other women watching with expressions that ranged from baffled to calculating. She was also aware that she was tired of managing her own distance, tired of cataloging what she felt and putting it in the correct drawer and making sure none of it was visible. Tired of being so careful about a thing that was becoming harder to be careful about with every week that passed. "Yes," she said. The Carmichael Conservatory was a long glass room off the back of the house, full of winter bare structures that would be climbing roses in summer. A few hardy palms survived. The air was damp and cold and smelled of soil and iron. It was not romantic in any conventional sense. Eleanor found it immediately preferable to the drawing room. They walked in silence for a moment. The glass caught the dark night outside, and their own reflections faint and doubled. "Lady Victoria will not be kind," Eleanor said. "I know. She will not be alone in that. I know that too. And yet you walked out of the dining room before the time had come." He glanced at her. "Did you want me to stay?" "I wanted you to." She stopped, started again. "I wanted you to think before doing things that will draw attention to a situation that is not yet, that I have not yet." She stopped again. "Named?" he said gently. She said nothing. They had reached the far end of the conservatory. Rain had begun again outside, soft and steady against the glass. In the light that came from the house behind them, she could see his face clearly, the gray-blue eyes, the particular quality of stillness that she had stopped trying to read and had started simply accepting as him. "Eleanor," he said her name without the title, which he had not done before. "I am not asking you to declare anything. I am not asking you to perform anything for society or for me." He paused. "I am asking not as a grand gesture, not as a tactical move. I am asking you to believe that what I want is to keep having conversations like the ones we have been having, in your study, in your fields, wherever you are willing to have them." She turned to look at him fully. "You could have anyone," she said. It came out without the armor she normally kept on it, quietly, nearly a question. "I know," he said. "That is why it matters that I am standing here with you. The rain against the glass, the smell of damp soil and iron." She looked at him for a long time. "I am not easy," she said. "I am aware. I will question everything you do. I will not simply accept what you tell me without evidence." "That seems fair." "I do not know what this is yet." "Neither do I," he said. "But I would like to find out, if you are willing." She turned back towards the room, toward the rain on the glass and the winter palms and the ordinary miraculous fact of a conversation she had not expected to have and could not now imagine having not had. "Ask me to dance," she said. "At the next public gathering, whatever it is." He was very still. "You refused me at the Hargrove ball." "I know. You said there were hundreds of women who would accept. I know what I said. What changed? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said with the careful, hard-won honesty of a woman who does not give things easily. I found out you knew the difference between French drains and open channels, and that you listened to a 70-year-old field hand and told him he was right. He laughed an actual, unguarded laugh. Quiet and genuine the first time she had heard it, and it was nothing like the measured charm of a man in a ballroom. It was simply a man finding something funny. I will ask you at the Hartley Spring Gathering, he said when he had recovered. 3 weeks. It will be the largest event of the early season. I know, she said. And when I ask you, he said, everyone will see. I know that too. She met his eyes. Ask me anyway. The Hartley Spring Gathering was as promised the largest event of the early season. Held at the Hartley Estate on the first Saturday in April, with the particular blooming extravagance of a family that had made its fortune in textiles and spent it enthusiastically on gardens. 400 people, a full orchestra. The first real warmth of the year coaxed out of an English sky that had been withholding it since October. Eleanor wore blue, not the fashionable blue of the season. A deeper, quieter blue, like the inside of a dusk sky, and Clara had done something careful with her hair, and she had argued about it briefly, and then allowed it, and she did not look like anyone trying to be seen. She looked like herself wearing blue, which was the whole point. She stood with Beatrice near the garden doors, and watched the room with the same attentiveness she gave everything, and tried not to notice where Nathaniel was. She failed at not noticing where Nathaniel was. I was across the room, surrounded as he always was by the inevitable orbit of people who wanted to be close to him. Beautiful women. Influential men. The particular social weather system that followed his name everywhere. He was speaking with the Hartley air, something that required attention, and she watched him nod and respond, and noticed that even now, even in the middle of it, he carried that quality of measured distance, as though some part of him was always slightly outside whatever room he was in. She understood that now in a way she had not 3 months ago. She understood it because she had spent 3 months watching him be himself in a place where nobody cared about his title, and she had seen what he looked like when the distance closed. He turned across the room and found her. She did not look away. He excused himself from the conversation. She could not hear it, but she could see the clean, unhasty way he did it. The turn of his shoulder, and he walked through the room. Not quickly, not with performance, simply toward her with the same directness he applied to everything. The room noticed. Of course it noticed. 400 people who had been watching Nathaniel Ashford all evening noticed when he moved. They noticed the direction. They recalculated. They wondered. He stopped in front of her. Beatrice beside Eleanor said absolutely nothing and took a deliberate step to the side. Lady Whitmore, he said. Lord Ashford, she replied. The orchestra is playing a waltz, he said. I can hear that. I was hoping you might grant me this dance. And Eleanor, who had stood in a ballroom 4 months ago and told him there were hundreds of women who would gladly accept, who had spent those 4 months building and dismantling arguments against everything she felt, who had put things in drawers and taken them out again, and who had finally, at the age of 25, allowed herself to believe that perhaps the world's categorization of her was not the final word on the subject. Eleanor looked at him and said yes. The waltz began. They moved to the floor, and 400 people watched, and the question that moved through the room like a current. Why her? Why her? Why her? Was a question. Eleanor heard and did not answer, because the answer was not for them. It was for her, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself have it. The waltz had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, and Eleanor was still finding evidence of it in unexpected places, in the way Mrs. Hodges now set 2 cups on the tea tray without being asked, in the way Thomas had stopped raising his eyebrows when Nathaniel's name came up in conversation, in the way Clara had taken to humming in the mornings, which she only did when she was pleased about something and did not want to say so directly. Eleanor noticed all of it and said nothing. What she said internally, in the careful and honest accounting she kept of her own feelings, was this: something had changed. Not everything. Not even most things. The estate was still struggling. The east field drainage was incomplete. The spring planting was behind schedule because of the February rains, and there were 3 letters on her desk from the family solicitor, Mr. Graves, that she had been answering one at a time with the specific discipline of someone who does not allow herself to be overwhelmed by looking at all the problems simultaneously. But something had changed. She was letting herself want things. Small things still. Careful things. She wanted the next Tuesday, or the next Thursday, when a knock would come, and Mrs. Hodges would appear and say his name. She wanted the particular quality of conversation that happened across the study desk, where nobody performed and nobody pretended, and 2 people who had arrived at adulthood through different kinds of difficulty met each other somewhere in the middle of an agricultural problem and understood each other in ways that had nothing and everything to do with agriculture. She wanted to keep dancing. She had not told anyone this. She barely told herself. But it was there, growing steadily in the place where she used to keep only practicalities, and she was cautiously privately, with every safety measure still intact, allowing it to grow. She should have known that was precisely the moment something would go wrong. The letter from Mr. Graves arrived on a Monday in mid-April. Not the routine kind, the kind that arrived weekly, with careful updates on the estate's slow improvement. This one came by special courier, which meant it had been sent urgently, which meant Mr. Graves was worried, which meant Eleanor sat down before she opened it. She was right to sit down. The Alderton property was going to auction. She read the letter twice. Then she set it flat on the desk and stared at the wall for approximately 4 minutes, which was for Eleanor an unusually long time to stare at anything without acting. The Alderton property was the 40-acre parcel that bordered the Whitmore estate to the north. It had been held by old Mr. Alderton for 30 years. He was 84, widowed, no direct heirs, and had been managing the property with the particular stubbornness of very old men who refuse to acknowledge that time is happening to them. Eleanor had known for 2 years that when Alderton died, the property would pass to distant relatives who would almost certainly sell it. She had not expected it to happen this spring. She had not expected, reading the rest of Mr. Graves's letter with increasing urgency, that the timing would be so catastrophically inconvenient. The Alderton property was not simply adjacent land. It contained the north water source that fed the Whitmore estate's secondary irrigation. It contained the old road access that connected the estate's eastern holdings to the main route. Without it, the Whitmore estate became significantly smaller in practical terms than it was on paper. The drainage work they had just completed in the East Field would be undermined within 2 seasons if the water source changed hands to someone who managed it differently. They needed that property. The auction was in 6 weeks. The price Mr. Graves estimated conservatively would be between £8,000 and £12,000. Eleanor's available capital was £400. She sat for another few minutes. Then she got up, picked up the letter, and went to find Thomas. Thomas read the letter standing in the yard with the particular stillness of a man receiving news that is worse than he feared, but not worse than he suspected was possible. He handed it back without saying anything for a moment. Then he said, 6 weeks. Yes. 8 to 12,000. At minimum. He looked at the north fields, at the line of oaks that marked the Alderton boundary. He had been walking that boundary for 30 years. He knew every stone along it. There is the London Bank, he said. I spoke to them last autumn. They will not extend further credit until the current improvement cycle shows 3 years of returns. She had known this before she came to find him. She had been cataloging options since she sat down with the letter. There is Lord Markham's consortium, but they require a 10% equity stake, and I will not give equity. That road ends badly. She paused. I have written to Mr. Graves asking for every possible alternative. But Thomas, I need you to be honest with me. He looked at her. If we lose the north water source, she said, tell me honestly what it means. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. A crow landed on the fence post at the yard's edge and sat there judging them. It means, Thomas said carefully, that the East Field work we just completed becomes half as effective within 2 seasons. It means we lose reliable access to the eastern holdings, and our routing costs go up by at least 1/3. He paused. It means everything we have built in the last 6 years becomes significantly harder to sustain. Eleanor nodded. She had known. She had wanted someone she trusted to say it plainly so she could stop hoping she was wrong. "Then we find the money," she said. "I will find the money." She went back inside and sat at her desk and began writing letters. She did not tell Nathaniel. She told herself it was because the problem was hers to solve. That was true. She told herself it was because she did not want to burden someone with a financial crisis that was not his concern. That was partially true. She told herself it was because she had always handled things herself, and she saw no reason to change that now. The truest reason, the one she did not write in her internal accounting, was that she was afraid. She was afraid that if she told him, he would try to fix it. And she was afraid of what it would mean if he did. Not because she did not want help, she was practical enough to understand that wanting help was not a weakness. She was afraid of the specific shape that his help would take. She was afraid that money, which was the most immediate solution, and the one he had in abundance, would enter the space between them and change its nature. She was afraid that if he paid for something, the something would become his. And the conversation they had been having across her study desk, the conversation between two people who were equal in the ways that mattered, would shift in a direction she could not navigate back from. She had been dependent on no one since she was 19. She did not know how to be partly dependent, and she did not trust herself to manage the difference. So she said nothing. She wrote to everyone she could think of. She wrote to a distant cousin who had done well in trade and might be persuaded toward an investment. She wrote to two former neighbors who had moved to comfortable circumstances. She wrote to a woman in York who ran a successful farming cooperative and had once expressed interest in Whitmore's land practices. She followed every thread Mr. Graves sent her. She was thorough. She was systematic. She was running out of time, and she knew it, and she woke up at 4 in the morning more than once in those 6 weeks, and lay there doing arithmetic in the dark. Nathaniel noticed. Of course he noticed. He had spent months learning to read the specific vocabulary of Eleanor's moods, the way she held her pen when she was worried versus when she was concentrating, the way she answered questions half a beat slower when something was sitting on her mind, the way she looked at the north fields when she thought no one was watching. He noticed all of it. He asked once carefully if everything was well. She said, "Estate matters, nothing unusual." He accepted this. He had learned enough about Eleanor to know that she told him things when she was ready and not before, and that pushing before she was ready produced exactly the result you would expect from a woman who had been managing on her own since she was 19. What he also did, because he was Nathaniel Ashford, and he had never been able to sit with a problem he could see and do nothing about it, was ask William to find out what was happening. William Hartwell was good at finding things out. He had the particular gift of men who appeared to be only moderately paying attention. People talked around him, through him, past him, and he remembered all of it. Within a week, William had the broad outline, the Alderton property auction, the timing, the likely price, and the very clear picture of what the Whitmore estate's financial position was, which was not the position of a family that could bid competitively at auction. He wrote it to Nathaniel's townhouse on a Wednesday evening and told him over dinner. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when William finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She hasn't told me," he said. "No," William said. Another pause. "She's trying to solve it herself." "She's been trying to solve it herself for 3 weeks," William said. "By the look of the correspondence Mr. Graves has been sending, she has exhausted the obvious options." Nathaniel set down his fork. William watched him and said with the tone of a man who has watched his friend make decisions for a long time and can see exactly where this one is heading, "Nathaniel." "It's solvable," Nathaniel said. "I know it's solvable. The question is whether you should be the one to solve it. The property goes to auction in 3 weeks. If it goes to the wrong buyer, I know what happens if it goes to the wrong buyer. So does she. That is precisely why she is currently writing letters to everyone she knows and losing sleep over it instead of asking you." William leaned forward. "She hasn't told you because she is afraid of what it means if you step in. Can you not see that?" Nathaniel looked at him. "She has spent 6 years building something on her own terms," William said. "She does not want it saved. She wants to save it. There is an enormous difference. And if you take that from her, even with the best intentions in the world, she will not see a man who loves her. She will see everything she has ever believed about why she cannot trust this." The firelight moved in the room. "I know that," Nathaniel said. "Then don't. But she will lose it, William." He said it quietly with the controlled force of something that had been sitting compressed for several days. "She will lose the water source. She will lose the road access. Everything she has spent 6 years building becomes harder. I can prevent that. I have the means to prevent it, and I am sitting here." He stopped. "I cannot simply watch something I can fix." William sat back. He looked at his friend with the expression of a man who has run out of arguments, not because he has been defeated, but because he understands that the person across from him is going to do what he is going to do regardless. "Then tell her first," he said. "Tell her before you do anything. Let her be part of the decision." Nathaniel was quiet. "Tell her first," William said again. "Promise me that." "Yes," Nathaniel said. But the auction was in 3 weeks. And in the following days, Eleanor's letters continued to come back without the answers she needed. And Nathaniel watched the time contracting, and the solution sitting unused, and the thing he feared most, losing something irreplaceable, because he did not act, pressing harder against him with every day that passed. He told himself he would tell her. He told himself that on a Monday, and on a Tuesday, and on the Wednesday, that Nathaniel rode to the estate and sat in Eleanor's study, and watched her run the morning numbers with the focused, slightly gray quality of someone who has not been sleeping enough, and he opened his mouth to tell her, and she looked up at him with her warm hazel eyes and said almost gently, "You don't need to worry about me, you know." And it broke something loose in him that should not have broken loose. He did not tell her. He bought the property. He did it quietly, as he did everything. Through a solicitor at auction, with a sealed bid that came in above the expected range to ensure there was no uncertainty. The property transferred to his name on a Thursday morning. He arranged through Mr. Graves, who was bound by professional obligation to handle the transaction, for the access road and the water rights to be formally extended to the Whitmore estate in perpetuity at no cost as a condition of the sale. He believed in the way that people believe things when they want very badly for them to be true, that this was a good solution. He planned to tell her that evening. He did not have the chance. Eleanor found out on a Friday. Mr. Graves came in person, which was unusual, and she knew before he sat down that something had happened. His expression had the quality of a man delivering news. He is not certain how it will be received, which was different from his usual careful neutrality. He explained the transaction in the precise measured language of solicitors. The Alderton property had sold at auction on Thursday. The purchaser had secured the property and had as a condition of the purchase formally extended water rights and road access to the Whitmore estate in perpetuity at no cost. Eleanor listened to all of it. Then she said, "Who purchased it?" Mr. Graves met her eyes. "Lord Ashford, my lady." The study was very quiet. "I see," she said. Mr. Graves continued speaking something about the legal documentation, something about the perpetual access agreement, something about how the arrangement was structured to protect Whitmore's interests in the most comprehensive manner possible. Eleanor heard the words. She could not have reported what they were. She was seeing something else entirely. She was seeing herself at 19, sitting in this same study while solicitors explained what her father's debts meant. She was seeing the distant cousins who had appeared after the death with their careful, helpful suggestions about how the estate might be managed more sensibly, by which they meant managed by someone other than Eleanor. She was seeing every person who had looked at her and seen a problem they could solve, rather than a person who was capable of solving it herself. She was seeing Nathaniel's expression in the Carmichael Conservatory. "I am not asking you to declare anything." And she was seeing herself believe it, actually believe it, actually allow herself to begin to trust that she was seen as something other than a situation requiring management. She was seeing how completely she had been wrong. "Thank you, Mr. Graves," she said. Her voice was very steady. "Please send me the documentation when it is ready." After he left, she sat at the desk for a long time. Then she wrote a note. He arrived within the hour. She had known he would. The note had been brief and direct, and he would have understood its tone. She was standing at the study window when he came in. She did not turn around immediately. She looked at the north fields, at the oak line that marked the Alderton boundary, which was the Ashford boundary now, and which would remain the boundary of something Nathaniel owned for as long as he chose, and she let herself look at it clearly and without the armor of optimism. Then she turned. Howe was standing just inside the doorway, and she could see from the quality of his stillness that he had understood on the ride here what he had done. Not in the moment of doing it. She had no doubt that in the moment he had believed completely in its rightness, but now looking at her, he understood. "You bought it," she said. "Yes." "Without telling me." A pause. "Yes." "Without asking me." "Eleanor." "Without," she said, and her voice remained level with the effort of a woman who has been keeping things level for 6 years, giving me the chance to decide whether I wanted it solved this way. "I wanted to protect the estate," he said. "The water rights, the road access, you would have lost." "I know what I would have lost." She looked at him steadily. "I have known for 6 weeks. I have been working on it for 6 weeks." The options were running out. The auction was 3 weeks away. She moved from the window. 3 weeks, Lord Ashford. I had 3 weeks remaining and a line of inquiry with the York Cooperative that Mr. Graves had not yet fully explored, and 2 possible investors who had not yet responded, and you removed all of that. She stopped. "You removed my ability to solve my own problem. You looked at what I was doing, and you decided it was not enough, and you used your money to take it out of my hands. That is not what I intended. I know what you intended." And here her voice changed, not louder, but different in its depth, carrying something that had been sitting compressed beneath the steadiness. "You intended to help. I believe that. I believe your intention was entirely kind." She met his eyes. "But you looked at me and saw a problem, and you solved the problem, and you did not once think that the manner of the solving was the whole point." He was quiet. "I have been managing this estate since I was 19 years old," she said. "I have made hard choices and wrong choices, and I have lived with both of them, and I have learned from both of them, and I have built something piece by piece that I can stand behind. Not because someone gave it to me, because I earned it." She stopped, and when she continued, her voice was quieter. "I was starting to believe, I allowed myself to believe that you saw that. That you saw me, not a situation to be managed." "I do see you," he said. "Then why," she said, "did you not trust me to handle it?" He had no answer for that. She could see that he had no answer, and she could see that he knew it, and the sight of it did not give her the relief she might have expected. It only made the thing she was feeling heavier. "You did not save me," she said. "You reminded me why I never trusted people like you." She said it quietly. It was not a cruelty. It was the truth, as she understood it in that moment, stated plainly, because she had never known how to be anything other than plain. She turned back toward the window. "Please go, Lord Ashford." He went. He rode back toward London, through the kind of April evening that is beautiful without caring whether anyone notices it. Long golden light across fields, still damp from the morning rain. Hedgerows beginning their first green. The sky doing something complicated and lovely above him that he did not look at once. He was thinking about what she had said. He had ridden away from difficult things before. He had encountered problems he could not solve with money or influence, and he recognized this now with a clarity that felt like cold water. He had eventually found a different application of money or influence, and called it a solution. He had never before today sat with the specific experience of being told that his method of solving things was itself the problem. He replayed her words. "You looked at what I was doing and decided it was not enough." Had he believed that he tried to examine it honestly? He had been afraid. He had watched the time contracting and the options narrowing, and he had felt the very specific fear of a man who sees something he values at risk and cannot stand the passivity of waiting. He had called it protecting her. But underneath the protection, underneath the genuine care that had motivated the action, had there been hidden in the machinery of it, the assumption that he could handle it better, that she needed handling. William had told him to tell her first. He had not told her first. He had not told her first because some part of him, some quiet, unexamined part that he had never been required to look at before, had been afraid that if he told her, she would say no. She would insist on managing it herself. She would make a decision he disagreed with. And he had, without fully knowing he was doing it, chosen to remove her choice rather than risk her making the wrong one. He stopped his horse at a gate in the middle of nowhere and sat there for a while. He had treated her like a problem to be solved. He had treated love like a problem to be solved. The long light moved across the fields. A pair of lapwings called somewhere in the grass. I thought about what she had built. He thought about Thomas's respect for her, the kind of respect that is not given to people being managed, but to people who lead. He thought about old Ned Holt and the Western field rotation and the 15 years of being told he was wrong, and the way Nathaniel had said, "Bring it to Lady Whitmore, she will hear it." He thought about how he had known even then that she was the kind of person who did not need protecting, who needed instead to be trusted to be exactly who she was. He had known it, and he had still done it. He started writing again, but differently than before. Not toward London and its easy distractions. Not toward the problem-solving instinct that had governed most of his adult life. Toward something harder and less familiar. Toward the specific reckoning of a man who has looked at himself honestly for perhaps the first time and does not entirely like what he sees. That night, he knocked on William's door. William opened it, took one look at him, and stepped aside. They sat in William's library for 2 hours. Nathaniel talked, and William listened, which was the inversion of their usual dynamic, and William listened, the way Eleanor listened completely without preparing his response while Nathaniel was still speaking. When Nathaniel finished, William said, "You were afraid of losing her." "Yes. So you did the thing most likely to make you lose her." "Yes." William was quiet for a moment. "That is remarkably human of you. It does not feel like a compliment. It isn't entirely." William leaned forward. "But it is honest, and I think it might be important." He paused. "You have spent your entire life solving things. Problems come to you, and you solve them, and people are grateful, and the problem is resolved, and everyone moves on. You have never had to sit with something you made worse. You have never had to repair a damage you caused." Nathaniel said nothing. "She does it all the time," William said quietly. "She makes decisions under pressure with incomplete information, and sometimes they go wrong, and she lives with it, and she learns from it, and she keeps going. That is how she built what she has built. Not by never making mistakes, by surviving them and continuing." He paused. "She is not asking you to be perfect. She is asking you to be honest. And what she found out today is that you were not honest with her when it mattered. How do I repair it?" William shook his head slowly. "I cannot answer that. And even if I could, I don't think you should be asking me. I think you know what you need to do, and I think the fact that you are sitting here asking me instead of simply doing it tells you something important about whether you have fully understood what went wrong." The fire burned low. Nathaniel stared at it for a long moment. He thought about Eleanor in the study, the steadiness of her voice delivering the blow, the thing underneath the steadiness that he had heard and that had broken something open in him that had not closed since. He thought about what she had said. "I allowed myself to believe that you saw me." He had seen her. He was certain of this, as certain as he had been of anything. He had seen her truly and clearly, and without the filters of what she could give him, or what her name meant, or what having her beside him would look like from the outside. And still, he had not trusted her. He had not trusted her with her own problem. He had reached past her to solve it, and in doing so, he had told her without words that his certainty outweighed her competence. He thought about the 1,200 acres in Hampshire. The estate manager he had hired, excellent man, capable, who made every significant decision independently, because Nathaniel had, at 33 years old, never learned how to share authority over something he cared about. He thought about his life in London, the orbit of people who wanted his money, or his influence, or his name, and how he had responded to that loneliness, not by learning to trust, but by learning to control, to solve, to provide solutions, so that he was always necessary, always useful, always the person who fixed things, because a person who fixes things is never fully left. He sat with that for a while. It was not comfortable. It was not supposed to be. In the morning, he did not write to her. He did not send flowers. He did not arrange some further demonstration of care through Mr. Graves or Thomas, or any of the practical channels by which he usually communicated. He did not arrive at the estate uninvited, or send William to smooth the ground in advance. He sat at his desk in the Mayfair townhouse and he thought. He thought about who she was. He thought about what she needed. He thought about the specific failure he had committed, not just the action, but the reasoning underneath the action, and he tried to understand it all the way down, not just the surface of it, because Eleanor would know the difference. When the time came, she would know whether he had understood, or whether he had simply learned to say the right words. He did not want to say the right words. He wanted to have understood. On the third day, he began to write. Not a letter of apology, though it contained an apology. Not a justification, though it contained an explanation. Something more difficult than either an honest accounting of why he had done what he had done and what it told him about himself, written for a woman who would read it exactly as carefully as she read ledgers and recognize instantly whether it was real. He wrote it, and he crossed sections out, and he rewrote them, and he looked at it for a long time. He was not ready to send it yet. He needed to understand something first. Something that had been sitting at the edge of his thinking for 3 days, waiting for him to look at it directly. He needed to understand whether he was capable of being the kind of man that Eleanor Whitmore deserved. Not the man he had been when he arrived in her study with good intentions and insufficient humility. Not the man who solved things from a comfortable distance. The man who could stand beside her, truly beside her, not in front of her, not arranging things in advance, and trust her. He was 33 years old, and he had never been required to trust anyone with anything that truly mattered. He was beginning to understand that this was the deficit he needed to address, not as a strategy for winning her back, but because she had shown him in the way she had looked at him in that study that there was a version of himself he had not yet become, and that version was the one worth becoming, regardless of what it cost him. He put the letter away. He sat with what he had broken. He let it be broken because some things needed to be fully understood before they could be repaired. And somewhere 2 hours southeast of London, in a house with a library that contained an 1825 edition of Loudon and a study full of ledgers that were slowly, stubbornly improving, Eleanor Whitmore sat at her desk in the quiet that she had rebuilt around herself like a wall, and looked at the north field through the window and felt the particular pain of a person who has been right about something they very much wanted to be wrong about. She did not cry. She worked. But the drawer that she had opened, the one where she had kept the thing she was only beginning to name, was very still now, and the silence it held was the loudest thing in the room. London did not need confirmation to form an opinion. It needed only the suggestion of one. The suggestion in this case had arrived at the Hartley Spring gathering in April, when Lord Nathaniel Ashford, the most desired unmarried gentleman in London, a man with a fortune large enough to reshape a country estate, a man with options that extended in every direction, like roads from a capital city, had crossed a ballroom floor with 400 people watching and asked Lady Eleanor Whitmore to dance. Society had been chewing on that moment ever since. For 3 weeks while Eleanor sat in her study with the silence of a broken thing, and Nathaniel sat in his townhouse with the letter he could not yet send, London had been constructing its verdict. The verdict was assembled as London's verdicts always were, from partial information, competitive interpretation, and the particular pleasure that certain people take in reducing complicated human situations to their most unflattering explanation. The verdict was not kind. It began, as most social campaigns begin, with questions that were not really questions. "Have you seen much of Lady Whitmore this season?" Lady Victoria Pembroke asked at a Tuesday morning call at Lady Ashworth's house, in a tone that suggested the question was innocent and the asker was merely curious. "I hadn't realized she was part of the season," someone replied. "She wasn't, not really." A pause, a smile. "But then circumstances change, don't they?" This was the efficient machinery of it, not accusation, not slander, but the precise deployment of implication. Lady Victoria was skilled at implication. She had been practicing it for years. She did not dislike Eleanor personally. Eleanor was correct about that. What she disliked was the disruption, the sense that the natural order of things, the careful hierarchy by which beauty and birth and connection determined value, was being quietly undermined by a woman who had no business being where she was. That disruption needed to be addressed. By the second week of May, the implication had crystallized into something more specific. It moved through drawing rooms and morning calls, and the particular intimacy of carriage rides between events. She pursued him. She engineered the introduction at the Hargrove ball. The refusal was calculated to intrigue him. She is not what she appears. The estate is nearly insolvent. She needs a fortune. He is a kind man. He does not always see when he is being managed. She is not suitable. She has no connections, no beauty worth speaking of, no charm, only a certain peasant stubbornness that some men mistake for character. None of it was said directly to Eleanor. It did not need to be. It traveled the way these things travel, arriving before you present in every room before you entered it, visible in the slight recalibration of greetings, the fractional cooling of eyes that had been warm the week before. Eleanor heard it. Of course she heard it. Eleanor missed very little. Beatrice was the one who told her plainly. She arrived at the Whitmore estate on a Thursday morning in mid-May, without sending word in advance, which was not Beatrice's custom, and therefore meant something. Eleanor saw her carriage from the study window and felt the particular weight of news that is already known but has not yet been confirmed. They sat in the morning room tea, untouched, the May light coming through the windows with unseasonable warmth, and Beatrice told her. Not the full catalogue of it, which would have taken longer than either of them wanted to spend on it, but the shape, the rumors, the source, the direction they were traveling, the likelihood that the season's largest events would make them louder. Eleanor listened with her hands folded in her lap and her expression composed. When Beatrice finished, she said, "How bad?" "It depends on what Lord Ashford does next," Beatrice said carefully. "If he distances himself, which no one would blame him for socially, it quiets down. If he continues to indicate a preference, it will escalate. And if I distance myself," Beatrice was quiet for a moment, "it would help the situation, for him." Eleanor nodded slowly. She had known this already. She had been turning it over for 10 days with the same systematic attention she gave the estate accounts, and she had arrived at the same conclusion each time. There were not many paths through the current situation that did not require someone to pay a cost. The question was, who paid it? "They are saying she is not suitable," Eleanor said, not with bitterness, with the flat accuracy of a woman reading a column of figures. "Yes. They are saying she trapped him." "Yes. None of it is true." "No," Beatrice said. "None of it is true." Eleanor looked at the window. The May light fell across the floor in long, warm panels, the kind of light that promises summer and delivers it, usually eventually, if you wait long enough. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Beatrice looked at her carefully. "I think that depends on what you want." "I want—" Eleanor stopped. She started again. "I want the estate to continue improving. I want Thomas and Ned Holt and Jim Carver and Mrs. Hodges and everyone who depends on this land to be secure." She paused. "I want to be the kind of person who does not allow other people's fears to decide her future." Another pause, quieter. "And I have wanted something I am not sure I have the right to want anymore." "You mean him?" The word sat between them with the straightforwardness of Beatrice's particular honesty. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I mean him." "Then tell me something," Beatrice said. "The property he purchased, his intention when he did it, setting aside the manner, setting aside that he should have told you first and did not. His intention was to protect what you had built." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I believe that." "And the weeks before that, the visits, the field meetings, the conversations." "Yes. I was not pursuing a novelty," Beatrice said. "He was pursuing you." Eleanor was quiet. "You know the difference," Beatrice said gently. "You are too intelligent not to know the difference." "Knowing the difference," Eleanor said, "does not make the other things less true. He did not trust me. He saw a problem and he solved it without asking me. And now—" She stopped. And now society is saying I am not suitable, and every day I remain connected to him in any public way. Those words go louder, and She pressed her hands flat on her knees. He has a future that I should not be allowed to damage. He has political connections, responsibilities, a position that requires a certain kind of standing. I am not, she breathed carefully. I am not the strategic choice. I have never been the strategic choice. And I was foolish to forget that even briefly. Beatrice was very still. Eleanor, she said, look at me. Eleanor looked at her. You are not protecting him, Beatrice said. You are protecting yourself. And I understand it. I understand it better than almost anyone, but I need you to be honest about which one you are doing. The May light moved across the floor. Eleanor did not answer, but her hands folded in her lap, pressed tighter together for just a moment. The letter from Nathaniel arrived the following Monday. Mrs. Hodges brought it on the morning tray with the careful neutrality she had adopted regarding anything that bore his seal, which Eleanor appreciated. She set it aside and finished her tea first because she was the kind of woman who finished things before starting other things, and because she needed 30 seconds to prepare herself for whatever it contained. She had told herself over the past 3 weeks that she was not waiting for it. She had believed herself approximately 60% of the time. She opened it. It was 4 pages. His handwriting was neat and slightly compressed, the hand of a man who thought faster than he wrote and had disciplined himself to slow down. There was a place near the bottom of the second page where the pen had pressed harder, where something had been reconsidered mid-sentence and then continued anyway. She noticed that before she fully understood the words around it. She read it twice. It did not begin with an apology, though the apology was there. It did not begin with a justification, though the explanation was there. It began with the thing she had least expected, the honest accounting she had not known she was waiting for, written by a man who appeared to have spent 3 weeks genuinely looking at himself. He wrote about what he had done and why. Not the surface of it. I was afraid you would lose the water rights. I acted to protect you. But the underneath of it, the part she had named to his face and watched him have no answer for. He wrote that he had chosen to remove her choice because he was afraid of what she would choose if given it. He wrote that this was not protection, that protection required the consent of the person being protected. He wrote that he had spent his adult life learning to solve things and had never understood until she refused to accept his solution. That solving things without consent is not solving things, it is taking them. He wrote, I have been afraid for most of my life of being left by people I value. Not because they stopped caring. Because they finally saw the person behind the position and found him insufficient. I have never allowed anyone close enough to test this. I solved problems instead. I made myself necessary instead. With you for the first time, I wanted to be chosen, not needed. And when the crisis came, I reverted to the only thing I knew how to do. I made myself necessary. I took away your right to choose. And in doing so, I proved more completely than any argument you could have made that I was not yet the person I wanted to be for you. There was more. There was a paragraph about what he had understood in the weeks since, about the pattern he had finally examined, about the specific ways in which his management of everything had been a way of managing distance, of staying necessary without becoming vulnerable. There was a paragraph that was the most honest thing she had ever read from anyone, in which he said plainly that he did not know whether he had already damaged what was between them beyond recovery, and that he was not writing this letter to ask for reassurance on that question. He was writing it because she deserved the truth of his understanding, regardless of what she decided to do with it. He did not promise wealth. He did not promise to transfer the Alderton property. He did not promise protection or security or any of the material things he could with complete ease have deployed in that moment. He promised only this: I see you. Not a situation, not a problem, not an estate that needs managing or a woman who requires protecting. You. The person who reads Loudon for pleasure and argues with Thomas about drainage and told a 70-year-old man that he was right. I see her. And I have failed her once in a significant way, and I will not lie to you and promise I will never fail again, because that promise would be worth nothing. What I can promise is that I will not fail her in that particular way. I will not take her choices. I will not solve things without her consent. I will not mistake management for love. I will not write again unless you want me to. But I wanted you to know that I understand. Not as a strategy, because you deserve to know it. She folded the letter along its original creases. She sat for a long time. Then she put it in the drawer. Not the drawer she kept for practical correspondence. Not the drawer she kept for problems to be addressed, but a different drawer. One she used for almost nothing. One that held her father's last letter and a pressed flower from her mother's garden, and 3 or 4 other things she kept without being able to explain why. She did not write back that day. She needed to think. What made Eleanor's thinking difficult was that she could not in good conscience disagree with any of it. She had built over the past 3 weeks a very clean structure of reasons for maintaining her distance from Nathaniel Ashford. The structure was logical. It was defensible. It addressed the real costs and real risks of continuing. It accounted for the estate, for the rumors, for the long and unambiguous history of what happened to women in her position when they let themselves want things that were not meant for them. The structure was also, she was beginning to suspect, an architecture of fear dressed as practicality. She tested this uncomfortable suspicion, the way she tested all uncomfortable things methodically, without sentiment, looking for the counter-argument. She asked herself, if I had no fear, what would I do? Not what would be strategic. Not what would be safe. What would I do? The answer came back clear and immediate and deeply inconvenient. She would write back to him. She sat with that for 2 more days. On the 3rd day, she went to find Thomas. He was in the east, the drained field, the solved field, the field that had taken months of planning and argument, and the collaboration of more minds than one, checking the spring growth with the expression he wore when things were going correctly, and he was cautiously allowing himself to believe it. She stood beside him and looked at the field for a moment. "Thomas," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "I always answer honestly," he said, "even when you'd prefer I didn't." "Am I self-sufficient, or am I isolated?" He turned to look at her. He was quiet for a long moment. "Those are not the same thing," he said. "I know. Which one am I?" He looked back at the field. The spring growth was coming in even and green. The drainage channels were holding. Everything was working the way it was supposed to. "When your father died," Thomas said, "you walked into a study full of problems, and you sat down, and you started solving them. I have never in my life seen anything like it. You were 19 years old, and you had more clarity and more courage than men twice your age." He paused. "That was self-sufficiency. That was necessary, and it was real, and you should be proud of it." "But," she said, "but he said self-sufficiency is a tool. It is not a way of being in the world. It is what you use when you have to manage alone. It is not what you use when you have the option of not managing alone." He looked at her. "You have been using it as armor for 6 years, my lady. It kept you safe. It also kept everything else out." He paused, "including things that perhaps deserve to come in." She did not say anything. "He made a mistake," Thomas said. "A significant one. I am not dismissing it. But I have watched that man sit at this estate table and argue about drainage with the same attention he gives everything else, and I have watched him speak to Ned Holt and Jim Carver like they were people worth listening to, and I have watched him look at you." He stopped. "He looks at you the way I looked at my wife when we were young. Like you were the most important thing in the room. Like the room was fortunate to contain you." Eleanor looked at the east field for a long time. "He hurt me," she said quietly. "Yes," Thomas said, "he did. People who hurt me do not generally get second opportunities. I know." He picked up his walking stick from where it leaned against the fence post. "But you have spent 6 years being the person who decides when things are given second opportunities. Crops land ideas. You don't write off a failed season. You understand why it failed, and you try again differently." He looked at her. "People deserve at least the same consideration as a season." She almost smiled. She stopped it, but less firmly than usual. "You are not a neutral party in this conversation," she said. "No." Thomas agreed. "I am not. I want you to be happy, my lady. I have wanted that for 6 years, and I have kept my mouth shut about it because it was not my place to say. But you asked me honestly, and that is my honest answer." She nodded slowly. She walked back to the house, and she began very carefully to think about what she was going to do. She had reached no final decision when the invitation arrived. The Merriweather Ball. June 1st week, Grosvenor Square was the largest formal gathering of the London season. It had been held annually for 40 years. Everyone came, everyone dressed, everyone watched everything with the particular intensity of people for whom social events are the primary arena of consequence. The invitation had come to the Whitmore estate because Clara had been to a Merriweather event the previous year as a guest of Lady Ashworth and had been added to the list on the basis of being universally charming and delightful. Eleanor had been included by extension. Eleanor had planned to decline. She was going to write a polite note. Pressing estate concerns. Prior commitment. The usual language of graceful absence. She had the note half written when Clara appeared at the study door. Clara had not said much in the past 3 weeks about the situation. This was not because she did not have opinions. Clara had opinions about everything, delivered with the warmth and gentleness that characterized everything she did. It was because she understood without being told that Eleanor was in the process of finding her way through something that could not be found through faster with company. But now, Clara stood in the doorway with the specific expression she wore when she had decided that the moment for silence had passed. "You are declining the Merriweather invitation," Clara said. "I am." "Because you are afraid." Eleanor set down her pen. "I am making a practical assessment of the costs of attending a major social event while society is actively constructing a narrative about me." "That is a very good description of being afraid," Clara said. Eleanor looked at her. "Clara, no." Clara came fully into the room, which was not her usual approach. She tended to conduct these conversations from doorways, allowing Eleanor the option of ending them. Today she sat in the chair across the desk. "I have been quiet for 3 weeks because I know that is what you needed. But Eleanor, you are about to make a decision that I think you will regret for a very long time, and I cannot be quiet about it anymore." Eleanor waited. "You did not fall in love with him because he was convenient," Clara said. "You fell in love with him in spite of every reason you gave yourself not to. That is not a small thing. That does not happen to you, Eleanor. That does not happen to you, and you know it. And the reason you are sitting here declining this invitation instead of deciding what to wear is because you are more frightened of being happy than you have ever been of being hurt." The study was very quiet. "Being hurt," Eleanor said, "is something I know how to survive." "I know," Clara said gently. "That is exactly what I mean." Eleanor looked at her sister. 19 years old, dark-haired, bright-eyed, with the warmth that Eleanor had always loved in her without envy, and felt something move in her chest that was not the careful, contained feeling she had been managing for 3 weeks. Something older than that. Something that had been sitting in her since she was a girl, learning to be second. "What if it goes wrong?" she said, very quietly. Barely a question. "Then it goes wrong," Clara said, "and you survive it as you survive everything. But Eleanor, what if it doesn't?" The May light had become June light since they last talked about this. Longer now, later into the evening, the particular gold of early summer that makes everything look more possible than it did. "Go to the ball," Clara said. "See what he does, and then decide." Eleanor looked at the half-written note on her desk. Then she picked it up and set it aside. "What color?" she said slowly. "Do you think I should wear?" Clara exhaled a long breath with the quality of something released. She smiled the smile she reserved for moments when Eleanor did the unexpected thing. "Not green," she said. "You always wear green. Something different this time." "Blue," Eleanor said. "Again." Clara reached across the desk and took her hand for just a moment. "Yes," she said. "Blue." The Merriweather Ball was everything the outline of it promised. Grosvenor Square dressed for the occasion, carriages arriving in the warm June evening. The house lit from every window, the sound of the orchestra reaching the street. Eleanor stepped down from the carriage in the blue gown and the careful hair, and felt the particular quality of a decision that has been made and cannot be unmade. She was here. That was the decision. Everything else would follow from it, or it would not. She found Beatrice almost immediately, because Beatrice had been watching for her. "You came," Beatrice said. "Clara convinced me. I will send Clara a very nice gift." Beatrice looked at her steadily. "He is here." "I assumed he would be." "He arrived an hour ago. He has spoken to approximately no one with any real attention. He has the look of a man waiting for something." Eleanor said nothing. She straightened slightly the way she always did when she was preparing for something difficult, and looked at the room. It was the fullest she had ever seen it. 400 people, perhaps more. The first week of June in London, and everyone who mattered was here, and the music was beautiful, and the light was soft and warm, and it was the kind of evening that would be remembered as the best of the season, regardless of what happened inside it. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, and did not drink it, and moved into the room. She was aware of the moment people noticed her. Not because she was beautiful, she had never traded on beauty, and had no particular investment in whether the room found her so tonight. But because she was Eleanor Whitmore, and Eleanor Whitmore at the Merriweather Ball was a data point that this room had been waiting for, and data points get noticed. She held herself steady. She spoke to Beatrice. She spoke to the botanist's widow from the Carmichael dinner, who was here with her niece, and was delighted to discuss a paper on soil acidity she had recently read. She did not search the room. She did not position herself. She simply was in the room present, and unhiding, and let whatever was going to happen approach her. She was speaking to the botanist's widow about mycorrhizal networks when she felt the shift. It was the same shift she had felt at the Hartley gathering, the subtle reorientation of the room, the slight change in the quality of the air that happens when 400 people without quite deciding to begin paying attention to the same thing. She did not turn immediately. She finished her sentence. She thanked the widow. She turned. Nathaniel was across the room. He was looking directly at her. She had thought in the weeks since the study that she had prepared herself for seeing him. She had thought that she had catalogued everything carefully enough that seeing him would be a data point she could process without disruption. She had been wrong about that. He looked the same. Of course he looked the same. It had been 3 weeks, not 3 years, but there was something in his face tonight that she had not seen before. Not the composed steadiness she had come to recognize as his default. Something quieter than that. Something that had been worked toward, she suspected, over long and honest nights. He moved. He moved the way. He always moved in these rooms, without hurry, without performance. But tonight, there was a different quality to it. He was not moving with the ease of a man who is used to moving through spaces that accommodate him. He was moving with the deliberateness of a man who has decided on something and is going to see it through. He passed the women who had arranged themselves as they always did in his vicinity. He passed the men who straightened slightly when he moved near. He passed Lady Victoria Pembroke, who stood with 2 other women and watched his trajectory with the expression of someone watching an outcome she had not fully prepared for. He walked to Eleanor. He stopped in front of her. She could feel the entire room holding itself still. 400 people who had come for music and dancing and conversation, all suddenly interested in this specific 2 feet of Grosvenor Square ballroom. She looked at him. She did not look away. He held her gaze, and in his face she read it the way she read everything, carefully and honestly. Not triumph, not possession, not the satisfaction of a man who has arranged a good outcome. She saw something that looked like someone who had been afraid and had decided that the fear was not sufficient reason not to act. He said quietly enough that only she could hear the beginning of it, and then somewhat louder because the room had gone still, and the words carried, "I do not choose her because she needs me." The room was absolutely silent. "I choose her," he said, "because she is the only person who ever made me want to become better." Eleanor did not move for a moment. She looked at him, at this man who had arrived in her life at a winter ball and refused to be managed back out of it, who had sat in her study and argued about drainage and listened to Ned Holt, and written her 4 pages of the most honest accounting she had ever read, who had made a significant mistake in a way that revealed everything about himself, and who had then, instead of using power or money to smooth it over, sat with it and understood it, and she felt the drawer open. Not carefully this time. Not with the measured caution of a woman protecting herself. It opened because she had finally stopped holding it shut. She thought of what Thomas had said. Self-sufficiency is a tool, not a way of being in the world. She thought of what Clara had said. What if it doesn't go wrong? She thought of what she had said to herself at 19, building the wall she had needed then and had not needed for some time now, and had kept standing out of habit and fear, and the particular stubbornness of a person who has survived by never letting anything past her defenses. She thought about what it would mean to let something past. She thought about what it would mean not to. She met his eyes. "You should know," she said, and her voice was steady, but it was a different kind of steady than the steadiness she had used in the study 3 weeks ago. This one had something alive underneath it, that I am not easy to love. I will question everything. I will argue. I will sometimes choose the estate over evenings and the drainage over dinner parties, and I will not be sorry about it. I know, he said. I will not be managed. I know. And if you ever again solve a problem that belongs to me without asking me first, she said, I will be considerably less restrained in my response than I was last time. Something moved through his eyes that was not quite a smile, but was in the same country. I have no doubt of it, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. 400 people. The orchestra waiting. The June light through the tall windows and the particular still quality of a room that knows something is happening. Then ask me to dance, she said. He held out his hand. She took it. Not because she needed to be saved. Not because she had run out of alternatives, or because the estate required it, or because society had forced her into it. She took his hand because she had chosen it with full knowledge, with clear eyes, with the specific courage of a woman who has spent years protecting herself and has decided that this tonight in this room with this person is worth the risk of being open. The orchestra began. They moved onto the floor. And the room, which had been holding its breath for 3 weeks, for longer than that, for as long as two people who did not fit each other's expectations, had been finding their way towards something unexpected. The room released it. Lady Victoria Pembroke stood very still with her champagne glass and said nothing. Beatrice, near the garden doors, allowed herself a very small, very satisfied smile. Clara, at the edge of the room where she had come to find Eleanor and had found something better, put her hand over her mouth and felt her eyes go bright with something warm. And Eleanor Whitmore danced, not performing, not managing, not holding herself at the careful distance she had kept from happiness for the better part of 6 years, simply dancing, with a man who had chosen her, not in spite of who she was, but because of it, in front of every person in London who had ever doubted the wisdom of that choice. And for the first time in longer than she could account for, Eleanor Whitmore did not doubt it herself. The morning after the Merryweather Ball, London woke up and had opinions. This was not unusual. London always woke up with opinions. What was unusual was the particular quality of those opinions, the way they split cleanly down a line that had not been visible before the previous evening, separating the people who had watched Nathaniel Ashford cross a ballroom floor toward Eleanor Whitmore and found it extraordinary from the people who had watched the same thing and found it inexplicable. The inexplicable camp was louder. It almost always is. He will come to his senses, said the inexplicable camp over morning calls and breakfast tables, and the particular intimacy of letters written quickly and sent faster. It is infatuation. It is novelty. A man of his position does not genuinely choose a woman of no particular distinction. It does not happen. It has never happened. And whatever he said last night, in whatever dramatic moment of misguided feeling, the morning will correct it. The morning did not correct it. He called at the Whitmore Estates London residence, a modest townhouse in a quieter part of the city borrowed from a distant aunt for the season, on a Tuesday, 3 days after the ball, with Thomas Reed in attendance, because Eleanor had asked him to be there, not as a chaperone in the conventional sense, but because Thomas was the closest thing she had to a father's voice, and she wanted one present. He came without performance, without flowers. without the theatrical apparatus of a formal proposal designed for an audience. He came with a question asked plainly across the parlor table, with Thomas sitting in the corner, reading a book he was not actually reading, "Will you marry me?" And Eleanor, who had spent the days since the ball in the particular state of a woman who has made a large decision and is living with the reality of it, rather than the idea, looked at him for a long moment and said, "Yes, on conditions." He did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, relieved, as though the existence of conditions was itself a kind of reassurance. "Name them," he said. "The estate remains mine, in management and in law, to the fullest extent the law allows. My decisions about the land, the workers, the tenants, those are mine. You may have opinions. I will consider them. I will not be overridden." "Agreed. The Alderton property." She held his gaze. "I want it managed as a shared resource between the two estates. I will not take it as a gift. I will not have it recorded as a favor done to me. We will structure a formal agreement between the two properties, negotiated between our respective solicitors on equal terms." Howe was quiet for a moment. She could see him thinking, not resistant thinking, but honest thinking, the kind he had always done when she said something that required him to recalibrate. "That will cost you more in the long term than simply accepting it outright," he said. "I know. The agreement will need to account for—" "I have already drafted the framework," she said. "Mr. Graves has reviewed it." She reached into the folder on the table beside her and slid it across to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. For a moment, something moved across his face that was not entirely composed. Something that was, if she had to name it precisely, the expression of a man who has found something so entirely itself that it humbles him. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes." She held his eyes. "If I am wrong about something, a decision, a choice, an approach to a problem, I want you to tell me. Directly. Not managed around. Not solved in advance of my knowledge. Tell me." "I will tell you," he said. "And if you are wrong," she said, "which you will be because you are human and imperfect, and so am I will tell you. And I expect you to hear it." "I will hear it," he said. She nodded. She looked at him once more with the full, clear attention she gave to things she had decided on. "Then yes," she said, "I will marry you." Thomas in the corner turned a page he had not been reading. The announcement went into the papers on a Thursday. By Friday, Lady Victoria Pembroke had convened what could only be described as an emergency drawing-room gathering of her closest and most aligned acquaintances. By Saturday, the counter-narrative had been refreshed and redeployed. "It is unwise, it is inexplicable, she is not suitable, he will regret it." Nathaniel was invited during this period to 3 separate private conversations with men of standing and influence, men who had known him since his arrival in England, men who had done business with him, men who felt with the particular confidence of people who have never been told their opinions are not required, that they had the right and perhaps the obligation to present him with a clearer view of the situation. He went to all 3 meetings. He listened to all 3 men. And then, with the measured, unhurried clarity that was the most characteristically himself thing about him, he explained to all 3 men that he had made his decision, that it was not made impulsively or in ignorance of the social landscape, and that he would not be discussing it further. He was very polite about it. He was also completely immovable. The men reported back to their respective circles that Lord Ashford was apparently decided. This information was received with varying degrees of exasperation and grudging respect. William Hartwell, who had watched all of this from a position of close proximity and considerable amusement, visited Nathaniel afterward, and found him in the library of the Mayfair townhouse with a stack of agricultural reports on one side of the desk and a draft property agreement on the other. "You have made yourself very unpopular," William observed. "I know," Nathaniel said without looking up. "Victoria Pembroke is said to be incandescent. She will recover. And you?" William sat down. "How are you?" Nathaniel looked up then. He looked, William would think later, like a man who has set down something heavy he had been carrying for a long time and is experiencing the unusual sensation of his own hands empty. "Better than I have been in years," he said. William looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for his friend to arrive somewhere and is glad the journey is over. "She is extraordinary," William said. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed. "She is. She is also entirely capable of destroying you in an argument about drainage. She has done it twice already." He almost smiled. "I am improving." William laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that filled the quiet library. "Good," he said. "She'll keep you honest." "That is precisely the point," Nathaniel said. The wedding was in August, not in London. London had not earned it. London had spent 4 months forming opinions about a situation it had not been invited into, and Eleanor and Nathaniel had discussed over the practical desk in her study on a warm July evening exactly what kind of ceremony they wanted, and the answer they arrived at independently and simultaneously was not a performance, not a display, not a statement, not a social event designed to announce anything to anyone. Something real. They married at the parish church in the village nearest the Whitmore estate on a Saturday morning when the August light came through the old stone windows in the particular gold of late summer that Eleanor had loved her entire life. The church was small, and the pews were full of the people who had actually been present in the story. Thomas Reed in a new coat that Mrs. Thomas had clearly insisted upon, sitting in the front pew with the carefully controlled expression of a man who will not cry and who is losing that particular battle. Ned Holt in the third row with his wife and his opinions. Jim Carver and Mrs. Hodges and the laborers from the Hampshire estate, who had done the drainage work and who had received their invitations with something between surprise and pleasure. Beatrice Langley in the second row, in a dove-gray dress that was quietly the finest thing in the room. She had helped Eleanor dress that morning and had said almost nothing, which was unlike her, and Eleanor had understood that the silence was its own kind of statement. Clara as maid of honor in pale yellow, with the particular brightness of a person for whom this moment is everything they had hoped for, and more. She had taken Eleanor's hands that morning before the walk to the church, and she had not said anything at all. She had simply looked at her sister fully, with all the years behind her eyes, and Eleanor had understood. William Hartwell, beside Nathaniel at the front of the church, with an expression that suggested he was going to be considerably more composed about this than Thomas Reed, and was prepared to be slightly smug about it. And Eleanor. Eleanor walked in on her own. There was no father to give her. There was no one whose permission was required. She walked in on her own because she had been walking into things on her own for 6 years, and this was not different from that, except that at the end of the aisle was a man she had chosen with full knowledge and clear eyes, and she was not walking toward need or rescue or safety. She was walking toward someone she wanted to stand beside. She wore blue. A deeper blue than the ball. A quieter blue. The blue of the sky an hour before dusk, somewhere between color and the memory of it. Her hair was simple. She wore her mother's pearls and no other jewelry. Nathaniel watched her walk in. He had the look of a man encountering something that exceeds what he had prepared for, not overwhelmed, but revised. As though the world had slightly rearranged itself around a new and better understanding of what mattered in it. The ceremony was short. The words were old and meant and spoken clearly by a vicar who had known the Whitmore family for 20 years and who said them with the particular gravity of someone who understands that the words are not a formality. When it was done, Eleanor looked at her husband. Her husband, the word still strange and new and somehow precisely right, and felt the thing that had been growing in the space where she used to keep only practicalities complete itself, finally, like the last piece of a complicated structure, clicking into place. They walked out of the church into the August gold. Thomas Reed, it should be noted, did cry. He has maintained to this day that it was the light. 3 years passed. They were not effortless years. Real years rarely are. There was the December in the first year of their marriage when the harvest was poor, not catastrophically, but enough to require recalculating the spring budget with the specific grinding attention that Eleanor had always given financial problems. Nathaniel sat across the desk from her while she worked through it, and he did not offer to solve it, and he did not reach past her to arrange something. He asked questions. He contributed where his knowledge was genuinely useful, And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when they had a plan that would work, he made tea because the kitchen staff had gone to bed and someone needed to. And Eleanor looked at him across the small circle of lamplight and felt something that she had learned over 3 years to simply allow. There was the spring in the second year when they disagreed, genuinely, seriously disagreed for 3 days about whether to expand the northern holding into what had been the Alderton Properties fallow section. Eleanor wanted to wait a year for the soil to rest. Nathaniel thought the timing was correct. They argued with the specific fluency of two people who have learned each other's minds and know exactly where the pressure points are. On the third day, Eleanor presented a revised analysis that accounted for 2 factors he had not weighted correctly. He looked at it for a long time. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said. "But thank you for saying so." They waited a year. The fallow section rested and ready produced returns in the third year that more than compensated for the delay. Nathaniel never said "I told you so" because she had told him so, and he understood that. Eleanor never said it either because she had already moved on to the next problem. There was also joy. This is important to say because stories about hard things sometimes forget to include the ordinary, private, unheroic joy that accumulates in a life that is genuinely and well lived. There was the evening in the first autumn when they walked the east field at dusk, and Nathaniel said something about the new drainage pattern's effect on the root structure, and Eleanor stopped walking and looked at him and said, "That is exactly right, and I have been trying to articulate it for 6 weeks." And there was a quality to the moment, two people standing in a field at dusk, understanding each other perfectly, on a subject that 90% of the world found deadly dull, that was, in its way, more intimate than any grand gesture either of them could have produced. There was Clara's wedding in the second year to a cheerful, unpretentious young man who had met her at a county exhibition and had fallen comprehensively in love with her without any particular agenda, which was exactly what Clara deserved. Eleanor stood at the front of a different small church in a different kind of August light, and felt watching her sister become someone's person. The specific happiness that is available only to people who love someone else more than they love the idea of them. There was the morning. A quiet Tuesday in the third year, unremarkable in every external way. When Eleanor sat at the study desk before anyone else was awake and looked at the accounts, which were no longer the accounts of a struggling estate. They were the accounts of a working estate. Not wealthy, not transformed overnight, not the product of someone else's money arriving to save the situation. The product of 6 years before and 3 years with, and every decision made along the way, with the steady, unglamorous, completely reliable attention she had always brought to it. She sat with that for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Thomas. Thomas was in the western fields. The fields. Ned Holt had argued for the ones resting on the longer cycle. Now the ones Thomas had conceded after Nathaniel named the argument, and Eleanor had heard it. They were in their second rest year, and the soil dark and quiet, and preparing itself, looked like potential. Thomas stood at the edge of them, with the specific expression he wore when things were going correctly, and he was cautiously allowing himself to believe it, which was the same expression he had worn the first time Eleanor had asked him honestly whether a plan would work 6 years and a lifetime ago. Eleanor stood beside him. "How does it look?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Better than I expected, honestly. The clay content is breaking down faster than we projected. Next spring should tell us." "Ned will want to know." "Ned already knows. He was out here at dawn." Thomas almost smiled. "He did not say 'I told you so.'" "He didn't have to," Eleanor said. They stood in the comfortable silence of people who have been working toward the same thing for long enough that words are sometimes surplus to requirement. "You know," Thomas said after a while, "when your father died, when I saw what you were inheriting and what you were going to have to do to save it, I thought." He stopped. He looked at the quiet resting field. "I thought it would break you eventually. The weight of it. Not because you weren't capable. I knew you were capable, more capable than anyone gave you credit for. But because you were doing it alone, and there is a kind of weight that capable people carry alone that eventually accumulates past what any person should have to carry." Eleanor listened. "It didn't break you," he said. No, she agreed. And it's not only because things got easier. He turned to look at her. You let someone carry some of it with you. That was the harder thing. For you, that was always going to be the harder thing. She looked at the western fields, at the dark prepared soil, at the oaks at the northern boundary that marked the Alderton land, the Ashford land. Now technically, though, in practice, it had become something that belonged to both of them, in a way that legal documentation could describe, but not fully contain. Yes, she said. It was. Thomas nodded. He picked up his walking stick. Your husband is looking for you, by the way, he said. He was at the house 20 minutes ago with that expression he gets. What expression? The one that means he's been reading something interesting and wants to tell you about it. Eleanor felt the thing she had stopped analyzing and started simply accepting move warmly in her chest. I'll go find him, she said. She found him where she usually found him when he was thinking, not in the study, not in the formal rooms of the house, but in the space between the house and the fields, the working middle ground that had no particular designation except that it was the place where the domestic and the agricultural met, where you could hear the house and see the land simultaneously. Howe was standing at the gate that opened onto the southern approach, looking out at the full extent of the estate, which was on a day like this, in the warm September light of the third year of their marriage. An expanse of managed, tended, productive land that had once been struggling and was now undeniably flourishing. He had a book under his arm. Of course he did. She walked toward him, and he heard her and turned, and the expression Thomas had described, the one that meant he had been reading something interesting, was there, but underneath it was something else, something quieter. The expression of a man who has been standing here long enough to have been thinking about more than a book. She stopped beside him. They looked at the land together for a moment. This was something they had learned to do, the particular companionship of two people who both love a place and can stand in it together without requiring words to fill the space. The western fields look good, she said. I saw them this morning. He paused. Thomas thinks next spring will confirm it. Thomas is cautiously optimistic, which is Thomas's equivalent of certainty. Nathaniel almost smiled. She could feel it more than see it. They were quiet for another moment. The September light moved across the fields with the slow, golden unhurry of a season that knows it is ending and is not rushing it. I had a letter from William this morning, he said. How is he? Well, he is coming in October. A pause. He asked after you specifically. He wanted to know if you had solved the rotation question. Tell him yes, and that the answer was in the third-year data, which I told him it would be. I will tell him that. He was quiet again. Then he said with the particular casualness that in his vocabulary meant something was not casual at all. Do you know what I was thinking about standing here before you came? The book, she said. Not the book. She looked at him. I was looking at the land, at the full wide working span of it, the fields and the tree lines, and the old oaks at the northern boundary, and the church spire just visible in the distance above the village roof. Everything that had been here when he arrived, and everything that had changed since. I was thinking, he said slowly, about the Hargrove ball. She waited. About walking across that room. About asking you to dance and what you said. He paused. Everyone in London spent months asking each other the same question. Why her? What did I see? What made me keep coming back to a woman who had refused me in front of 300 people and then told me my company was unnecessary? Eleanor said nothing. She listened the way she always listened, fully, without preparing her response. Everyone assumed there was a strategy, he said. An angle. Something I stood to gain. Or that it was simply novelty, the fascination of being refused, which would eventually wear off and resolve itself sensibly. He was still looking at the fields. I have been asked more or less directly probably 40 times in 3 years why I chose you. By people who wanted to understand it, and by people who wanted to convince me I had chosen incorrectly. And what did you tell them? She asked. Different things depending on the occasion. He turned to look at her then. The gray-blue eyes in the September light. The quality of attention she had stopped finding unsettling and had started finding simply true. But I have been standing here thinking about what the honest answer is. the one that is not diplomatic or appropriate for a drawing room. She met his gaze. Everyone who came to me, he said, came wanting something that belonged to me. My fortune, my name, the life that came attached to my position. They wanted my world, the access it provided, the comfort it represented, the things it could give them. He paused. And I do not blame them for that. I understand it. The world teaches people to want those things, and the things are real, and wanting them is not a moral failing. He looked at her steadily. But you, he said, were the first person who did not want my world. You wanted nothing from me, not my money, not my name, not the life my position could provide. When I came to your estate for the first time and stood in your field and talked about drainage, I was genuinely useful to you for approximately 4 minutes of the conversation. After that, you were correcting my assumptions. He paused. You were the first person I had ever met who required nothing from me, except that I be honest. Eleanor felt the drawer, the one that held her father's last letter, and the pressed flower, and 3 years of a life she had finally allowed herself to have, very still and very full. I have been thinking about what to say, he continued, if anyone asks me again. The answer I arrived at standing here. He looked back at the land once more, at the full, living, productive breadth of something that had been built by people who cared about it. Everyone once wondered why I chose you. She heard the shift in his voice, the subtle difference between speaking about something and saying the thing itself. And what is your answer? She asked quietly. He turned back to her. And in his face, she saw, as she had learned to read over 3 years, as she had stopped cataloging and started simply receiving, not the composed, measured steadiness of a man managing his distance from the world. Something warmer than that. Something that had been grown towards steadily and honestly over the years of a life shared without performance. Because everyone else wanted my world, he said. You were the only person who gave me a reason to love mine. The September light moved across the fields. The oaks at the northern boundary stood in it the way they had stood in light for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. Eleanor looked at her husband, at the man she had refused at a winter ball because she did not believe she was worth choosing, who had arrived in her life anyway, and had stayed and had made a significant mistake, and had sat with it honestly until he understood it, and had come back with 4 pages of truth instead of a grand gesture, and who stood beside her now in a field that had been saved not by wealth arriving to rescue it, but by 2 people working, arguing, deciding together. And she felt the thing she had spent so long keeping in drawers and out of sight and safely contained rise up in her without complication. Not the careful, protected, drawer-kept version, the full version. You know, she said, when I stood near those library doors at the Hargrove ball, and you walked toward me, I genuinely believed you had mistaken me for someone else. He looked at her. I hadn't. I know that now. I walked toward you, he said, because you were the only person in a room of 300 who looked as though she had somewhere more important to be. I was thinking about drainage, she reminded him. I know. The almost smile that she had learned over 3 years to watch for. That was the first thing I found interesting about you. She looked at him steadily. And the last. He thought about this with the genuine consideration he brought to things that deserved it. There is no last, he said. That's the point. The estate grew, not all at once, not in the dramatic manner of stories that compress time into triumph, but in the real, steady, unglamorous way that good work compounds over years. The western fields returned in the spring of the 4th year, exactly what Thomas had cautiously predicted, and Ned Holt had known they would. The north water source managed under the shared agreement Eleanor had negotiated with the formality her dignity required, proved more productive than either estate had independently projected. By the 5th year, the Whitmore estate was being discussed in agricultural circles, not as a curiosity, not as the property belonging to Lord Ashford's wife, but as a working model of sustainable land management that other estate owners were traveling to observe. They came to see the drainage system primarily. The hybrid approach, French drain along the upper-grade open channel at the tree line that had been worked out across a study desk by 2 people arguing about soil saturation in the early months of something neither of them had yet named. Thomas showed the visitors around with the pride of a man whose judgment has been publicly vindicated over many years and who is too dignified to say so directly. Ned Holt, at 74, now accompanied these tours when his knee allowed and was generous with his opinions. Jim Carver had hired 2 additional hands and had made improvements to the livestock management that Eleanor had approved and that had increased returns by 12%. Mrs. Hodges had stopped setting 2 cups on the tea tray and had started setting 2 without thinking about it, which was a different thing entirely. Eleanor was still at the desk before anyone else. She had simply added to the view from the desk the particular knowledge that someone else was in the house, that the quiet was shared quiet, rather than solitary quiet, and found that this changed the quality of the morning in ways she had not anticipated and could not precisely describe. She had stopped trying to describe it precisely. She had learned over the years that some things were not improved by precision. Some things were simply true and required only to be allowed. Clara visited in the autumn of the 5th year with her husband and their daughter, 18 months old, with Clara's dark hair, and everyone agreed the particular focused expression of an infant who has formed opinions and intends to share them. Eleanor held her niece in the garden on an October afternoon and watched the child examine a fallen oak leaf with the absolute undistracted attention of someone for whom a leaf is a genuinely new and remarkable thing. "She looks like you," Clara said, appearing beside her. "She has your hair." "But the expression," Clara smiled. "That is entirely you." Eleanor looked at the child, at the focused, unperformative seriousness of a human being encountering the world without any pretense about what it is. "I will take that as a compliment," she said. "It was meant as one." Clara touched her arm gently. "Are you happy, Eleanor?" The question was simple and direct, which was Clara's way. Eleanor considered it the way she had always considered honest questions, without rushing to the answer, without producing the answer she was supposed to give. She looked at the house, at the working, breathing, lived-in reality of it, at the fields beyond in their October state, some harvested, some resting, all attended to. She thought about the desk and the ledgers and the argument about the rotation that they would have again next spring, because they always had it, and they were both right about different parts of it, and neither of them would concede the parts they were right about, which was as it should be. She thought about the letters she had received last week from 2 estate owners seeking advice, which she had answered with the same plain directness she brought to everything. She thought about what Thomas had said, standing at the western field boundary, "You let someone carry some of it with you." She thought about the drawer which still held her father's last letter and her mother's pressed flower, and was considerably fuller now, with things she had stopped filing away and started simply keeping because they were worth keeping. "Yes," she said. Not carefully. Not with the qualified provisional delivery of a woman protecting herself from the consequences of certainty. Simply yes. Clara put her arm through hers, and they stood there for a moment. 2 sisters in an October garden with a child, examining a leaf between them, and it was ordinary in every way that mattered. There is a particular kind of woman that society does not know how to hold. She is not the kind that fits the categories, not the beauty, not the charmer, not the woman who makes rooms feel warmer simply by existing in them. She is quieter than that and more complicated. And the world is sometimes slow to understand that complicated is not the same as difficult and quiet is not the same as unremarkable. This woman learns often early that she will not be the one people reach for first, that the shape of her value is not immediately legible to people who are reading quickly. And she makes a choice not always consciously, not always in a single moment, but gradually across the years of her life, about what to do with that knowledge. Some women use it to close, to build walls that are called independence, and are sometimes independence, and are sometimes simply the architecture of a person who has decided that being overlooked is something she will do to herself before anyone else can. Eleanor Whitmore had been that woman. She had built carefully and well, and with enormous skill, and the walls had served her, and she did not regret them. But walls are not permanent structures. They are appropriate for certain seasons, and then the season changes, and what was protection becomes the thing keeping you from the life that is available, if you will only step through. She had stepped through, not because someone dismantled the walls for her, not because wealth arrived to make it safe, Because she had finally, after 25 years of believing she was the woman people respected but did not choose, allowed herself to be seen clearly by someone who had the patience to stand in her field and argue about drainage for an hour and call it a beginning. And because she had been brave enough in the end, in the conservatory, at the ball, at the study desk, with conditions on the table, and her whole life on the line, to accept that being chosen is not a trap. That vulnerability is not weakness. That a strong person and a loved person are not mutually exclusive categories. They are sometimes the same person. Looking out from the garden at the October estate, at the land she had saved, and continued to save, and would go on tending with the same unflinching attention she had always brought to it, Eleanor Whitmore knew herself to be both. She had been both all along. She had simply needed someone to stand still long enough to show her the proof.